Jeff, this is a very general question, but how did you get started in racing way back when?
You know, my family, my father owned a used car dealership, and he owned several things. He owned a furniture store, used car dealership.
Here in Clarksville?
In Clarksville, yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, what I was more familiar with was the used car business. And for whatever reason, he decided he wanted to sponsor a little race car, sponsor a car for a minute, and then he wanted to own a car, and other people drove the cars. And through the years, there was one of his last drivers. His name was Chester Albright. His son, Tony Albright, and I were about the same age, and we got to, you know, we kind of both wanted to start racing about the same time, and there wasn't enough track time for him and track time for me, and all we got to do was pack the track at that point in time. We didn't. It was a dirt car, and so we decided. My dad. I told my dad, I said, you know, I can probably do this about as well as, you know, as the next guy. And so he agreed to let me start racing some. And later on in life, he told me that I was right, that I could probably do it about as well as anybody, but it cost a lot more the way I went about it.
Yeah.
But I started off dirt racing.
Okay. Around here?
Yeah, you know, back when I started in the late 70s, you know, like every service station, that was what was always parked on the side of the service station. I'm sure over in the Carolinas, same way, and all through, you know, the Nashville area where were brought up also. But the you know, if you had a service station, you had no dirt car or an asphalt car up around the Nashville area. That's what most did on the weekends, and so, you know, I was always drawn to the cars sitting there, and so you know, my father actually owned a little service station that we had a race car at, and that's where they were working on the car along the way, and so I just fell into the racing trap.
You are a member of the National Dirt Late Model Hall of Fame, the inaugural class.
That's scary, isn't it?
What made you so good on dirt? And did you actually prefer dirt to pavement?
No, I can't really say that. It was all over the course of time. Things happened and changed. And when I first started racing, I mean, I wasn't really. I didn't know much about mechanics of cars, and my dad owned a bunch of cars, but he really used cars and things of that nature. But, you know, when it came to working on them, they were always sent somewhere else, and I was never around that, but I always had a little bit of interest in it. But as you know, as time goes on, I tore up so much stuff that I had to become a pretty good mechanic, so I learned how to weld and cut and do all the things you had to do back then, and so, you know, I just went along and didn't really run very good. I mean, if there's a place behind last, I was behind. I didn't run good at all, and just over the course of time, got a little bit better car. And I met a guy by the name of Jerry Inman. He was an old dirt racer and still around. He drove a car called D7, and he came to Clarksville Speedway one night, and he ran this big, his big race in, paid $500, and that was big for it back then.
Yeah.
They traveled from down in Mississippi to come up here to race for a $500 race, and I told my mom, I said, if I had that race car right there, I think I could do that. And so my dad bought that car from him, and so we brought it here and raced it the next big race. Jerry Inman shows up for this race also, and it's probably the same paying type race, and the first lap, I went in there and I hit the wall and just tore up everything, just killed that car. And So I'm sitting in the grandstands again watching Jerry Inman down there, and he wins the race. He wins the race that night, and I told my dad, I told my mom again, I said, if I had that car, yeah, I could. And so my dad goes down and sees Jerry after my mom talks to him, and he said, how will you trade cars? He said, well, I'll take your car home and fix it. And I said, and my dad said, no, I don't want to do that. And they squabbled over the price again, and Jerry finally told my dad a number, and he said, well, you need to get my race car off your trailer. And he said, well, and so we traded that night, and I got a car that I won a lot of races with.
Yeah.
And
so it really was the car.
Well, it happened to work out that time anyway. Yeah. So I won a lot of races with this car over the course of a year or two, and then as time goes on, we're up in Campbellsville, Kentucky, and they have a big race up there, and there's kind of a north-south line right here that, those cars were lighter, and they were the more store-bought cars than what I was racing, and so I parked beside a guy by the name of Ray Godsey, and at that time the car he was driving was built by a man named C.J. Rayburn. And so C.J. was there, and he asked my dad, he said, they were talking, and he said, you need to get your son driving one of my cars. And so they worked up a deal, and I got in one of the Rayburn cars then. And from that point in time, that changed. The Inman car changed my course big time. And then the Rayburn car stepped it up a notch again. And just from there, I won quite a few races through the years with that.
Now, I know that James Finch was a part of your career in stock cars, basically right from the very beginning. I think you did an Arca race in '89, a Busch race in '89, both in James's cars. How did you get hooked up with James?
Oh, James was way before that.
Okay,
about 1985 or 6, somewhere around that 84 or 5, right through those years, I was going to races that were paying pretty good money. Then I got to where I won a lot of races in my local track, and when you win, I got lucky enough. I won a lot of races, and then the crowd kind of turns. At first, they cheer you on, and then they want to see somebody else do it, doing better than me. And so I started traveling around and stayed away from here to keep. If I did win a race, you get down here, they start throwing things at you. It's like it got kind of bad, but. So I was traveling into some of these races, and this guy would pull up in this number 41 car, and his name was Buddy Boutwell, and he was coming from like in Panama City, Florida, down in that area, and he was coming to all the races I was at, and he did run good. He was a good racer, and so. Finally, I started meeting James, and we started having a conversation, and he's basically sending him around to outrun me. And
James was sending him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
a little bounty action.
Back then there was some bounty racing then, but this was just fun for James. Yeah. And so he finally came up to me and told me, he said, it'd probably be cheaper if I just, if you just started racing for me. And so he told me, he said, I'll just give you this much money and put the Phoenix on the car and the whole deal. And it was more money than I'd ever heard of anyway. And so I said, sure. And so he sent trucks, and eventually it all became his. Probably by 1986 and there, all that became James's equipment that I was racing. So I raced dirt for James for a long time, and then along the way, he started looking at some of this asphalt stuff, and I didn't know anything about asphalt, and so I started, following some of the ASA racing at that point in time.
So you did some ASA stuff?
No.
Oh, you just watched it?
I watched it, and I was trying to figure out what was going on there, and so C.J. Rayburn built me a car for the All-American 400 in Nashville. That was a game changer. It was dangerous. I mean, I knew I was going to wreck eventually. I wanted it to be as soft a hit as I could, but I didn't qualify for that race, and I was extremely embarrassed. And I thought, man, this asphalt racing, I just don't know how to do it. And so we got rid of that car, got a Howe car. I carried it over to North Carolina and over to Concord over there, and killed that car along the way. And then we ended up with another short track car from Port City Racing. And you always name all the cars, and this car was called Rag Mop, and so we started getting better and better and better with this car, and started winning. Matter of fact, we went back to the race I didn't win, and I think we won the next 3 in a row, All American 400s.
Wow! And
so that was a big deal. I mean, that's still a big race to me. I watched it this year. I go, I can't race it anymore, of course, but I go watch it every year.
What was the biggest transition from dirt to asphalt stuff? How does that translate?
I think it's easy. It's not easy. It's never easy. But then and now it's probably a little bit better. Uh-huh. Back then, there was a big difference in equipment. There's a big difference in the shocks, and I mean there still is. Don't get me wrong, but I just had never been around pavement, so it was all a big. I had to just basically quit doing one or the other because I couldn't focus on one because I was doing. If I short tracked asphalt, we basically took care of the car, and then if we dirt raced, we took care of the car, and it just became too much work for us. Just being a small team.
Now, was this still James?
It was all James.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Eventually, the stuff it moved to Florida, but James has been a big part of my whole racing since the mid '80s.
Well, did you talk to James and say, well, I'd kind of like staying on dirt? No,
I never did do that. I was always in for whatever the next step was, and if James had never come along, would I have continued to race dirt? Yes, I mean I would have continued doing that, but I was getting not necessarily. I was wanting to do something else also.
Okay.
So it was. It came along. Everything kind of. Then he started saying, "Well, let's try this and let's do this, and here we go."
Well, speaking of let's try this and let's do that and try it out or whatever, you did run an Arca race at Talladega in '89, and then a Busch Series event, I think at Charlotte in '89. Was that just the next progression? Or was that just something fun to do at the time for James and you?
Well, it was kind of both, really. I didn't know how deep he was testing the waters. I didn't know he wanted to go deep sea fishing. I thought we was going to, just stay close to shore. And he, we were the new fish in the bowl, and so when you are, you're getting. Back then, it's a little bit different. Then back then, if you had a Robert G car, you remember Robert G?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that was our first Busch car. It was number 49, and that was our first Busch car, and it was basically a Daytona. I mean, it was slick. It was if Robert G did it, you could take it to Daytona, and you could win the race, and so we bought this car and took it to Charlotte. Well, Charlotte, you need some downforce. I had a lot of speed. I just didn't have much control of the speed.
Yeah.
And so we struggled with that car, and I don't even remember where that car ended up after that. But it's a good chance it in the boneyard somewhere. But that car was it's a fast race car. We were just at the wrong place with that type of cars, like like carrying a Daytona car to Martinsville.
Yeah.
And so we, but that was the first Busch race I remember.
Wow. You talked about having a difficult transition from dirt to pavement short track, but then you go from pavement short track to Talladega. What was that experience like? Had you ever driven on a track that size before?
Oh no.
What was that like?
Well, it's like when you pull in there, it's just like just a different arena, different atmosphere. It looks like when you pull in there, you think, this is the interstate. We're going to go out there and hit the interstate. But I fell in love with the Daytonas and the Talladegas.
Did you?
Because James was big on he liked them too. That's what he wanted to race. I mean, if they raced Daytona and Talladega every weekend, he'd been fine with it. And but I love the air, learning the air and everything about it. It was, but I had some good cars there. I had some cars that were. We stepped our game up as time went.
Yeah. You were telling us a story on the way to lunch about Bobby Allison. You got a call from Bobby Allison, and you were working on a house or something, and you kind of blew him off.
Not necessarily blew him off. I was building a car wash over in town one that was ours, and I was up on the roof when this call. But Bobby's another one of the Buddy Boutwell type situations. To say, Bobby started coming to a lot of dirt racing. I mean, I started, he'd do autograph session. Yeah. I started meeting him, and he started coming around quite a bit. And then, as time goes on, Mike Alexander was driving the Ray Bestis car, and I had raced against Mike even the year before. I think 99% sure this is right. The year before, we were running the Snowball Derby, and he was running the Snowflake at that time. And if he entered that race, you had to outrun him down there. And so I wasn't in that race, but he wrecked and got into the wall and had some injuries. And so that leads up to Bobby Allison giving me a phone call. But I'm working on this car wash. I'm up on the roof, and that's back when the phones were if you had a cell phone, it is the size of a suitcase. Yeah. And so I was up on the roof working on it and screwing the roof down. And this guy that works for me, he said, "Hey Jeff, you got a phone call." I said, "Okay," and I said, "Just get a message." So he comes back. He said he didn't want to leave a message, and I said, "Well, just tell him to call back." And so he goes and tells me. He comes back. He said he don't want to call back, and I said, "Well, ask who it is." And he comes back and he said his name is Bobby Allison. And I said, "Well, tell him I'll be right down." And so I crawl down and go get on the phone with Bobby, and he said, "Hey, can you do me a favor?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Can you be at the airport? It's either 5 o'clock or an hour and a half from then." He gave me a time. He said, "Can you be there?" And I said, "Sure for what?" He said, "Well, just bring your helmet and bring a fire suit just in case." And I said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you about it when I get there." So he flies in his little Aerostar and picks me up at the local airport. And I said, "Bobby, what are we doing here?" And he said, "I need you to help me out and do something." So we're riding back in the plane, and he's telling me, he said, Mike Alexander was, he backed the car into the wall today, and he got out, and he said he just didn't feel up to it. He didn't want to do it anymore, and he lived to his word. He didn't, I don't think, after that. Yeah. And so I think maybe he started running a little bit of Nashville racing, which I was glad to see him do that. But he didn't want to do it anymore, and so he takes me to Charlotte. We stay in Charlotte overnight at the Speedway. He had a condo there, and then we stay there. We get up the next morning, and he goes and gets me suited up in a fire suit, and they throw all this together. And they throw me in the car, and I'd never seen Martinsville before. When they ran Martinsville, I was off racing for $500 a dirt race somewhere or something. Yeah. So they threw me out there and tried to explain to me what was going on, and so they fixed the car that he had backed into the wall, which was a smart move because I went and finished it off for him the best I could, but I didn't understand about the braking and all the entering. I didn't know anything about it, so I was a weapon.
You go to Daytona the next year, or you go to Daytona in '93 for the Arca season opener, and you win it from the pole. What do you remember about that day?
I don't remember a whole lot about the winning of the race. I remember the car was extremely fast. I mean, James started. He befriended the Morgan McClure race team and started, putting those parts in Arca racing, and it was kind of a recipe for success as far as this, for sure, for the speedways.
That you'd obviously won a lot of races to that point, but if I'm not mistaken, that Daytona Arca race was your first major stock car win.
It was.
Did you walk a little taller after that? Did that give you stock car credibility, or did you feel like you already had credibility because of everything you'd done on dirt?
No, I didn't even know if anybody ever knew what I did on dirt.
Yeah.
But the credit when you get in a car that's like, the class of the field, that gives you walking around power. That gives you credibility. But I always felt like every race I had to prove something. I had to prove myself. It wasn't off of the past. It was about the moment.
Okay, all right. I mentioned this earlier, but everybody who has ever known and or worked around James Finch has a wealth of James Finch stories. So let's hear them.
There's always something going. The snowball derby was a big deal for James and myself. That was a big. We look forward to that race every year, and we got thrown out of that race about every year. We, for whatever reason, they thought we soaked our tires. They thought we did this, and they was looking for reasons. But one of the funniest James Finch stories to me is back when we were dirt racing, was like getting laid into our dirt racing deal, and we go down to Milton, Florida, and I've heard this a million times and witnessed it. We were down in Milton, Florida, and I go out there and I'm running horrible, and we're kind of in James's backyard here, and we're like, there's 40 cars there, and I'm 30th practice, and just not running good. And so we James asked me what's wrong with the car, and I said, man, I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. And he goes over and somehow or another he runs into the guy that's running the scales. And there's no somehow to it. The guy came up to him and he said, "Hey man," he said, "I bet my whole," he worked down the Chevrolet place. He said, "I bet my whole paycheck on y'all this weekend." And he said,
the guy running the scales.
And he said, "I bet my whole paycheck on y'all." He said, "Are y'all just messing around?" And he said, "No, man." He said, "We're not messing around. We're just not running good." And he said, "Okay." And James said, "Now you run the scales?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I tell you what, I can probably help you out a little bit here." He said, "After this race, when he comes across, you just motion him on over." He said, "You might get your money's worth here." And so James comes over there, and we take 400 or 500 pounds of lead out of this car. And like it was a weapon. Everybody else is on really hard tires because their cars are heavier than what mine was at that point in time. And so we put on the softest tire, and I think Bloomquist run second, maybe a lap down or so. We just annihilated the field.
Yeah.
And when I came up to the scale, that guy, I slowed down and stopped, and he motioned me on, and here we go. So now, but there's always James. He's a lot of humor, smart man.